They say the dead tell no tales, but sometimes the way a body is found speaks louder than any words ever could. A cold February morning. A lifeless figure. The broken remains of a young man discarded like he never mattered. But Sam Nordquist did matter. His story wasn't supposed to end like this. A son, a brother, a friend. A man who carried kindness in his heart, who spent his days helping others, who sought nothing more than to be seen for who he truly was. But behind closed doors in the shadows of a small New York motel, he was erased, slowly, brutally, deliberately. For over a month, Sam endured something most of us can't even begin to comprehend. Trapped in a room no bigger than a prison cell, surrounded by people he once thought were friends, he suffered in silence. Not just the kind that fills the empty spaces between screams, but the kind that lingers when the world refuses to listen. And then, when there was nothing left of him to break, they took him away. Left him alone in the freezing dark as if his life had meant nothing. But it did mean something. And now we're going to make sure the world hears his story. Before the headlines, before the horror, before his name became a crime story, Sam Nordquist was just Sam. A child who grew up with a heart too big for the world he was born into. A son who spent summers exploring the woods near his home, who once nursed an injured bird back to health and cried when it finally flew away. A young man who, despite the challenges, carried hope like a flame in the dark. Those who knew him never spoke of his struggles first. They spoke of his kindness. The way he never let anyone sit alone at lunch. The way he would stay on the phone for hours if someone needed to talk. The way he believed, truly believed, that people were capable of goodness. He spent his days helping those who had been cast aside, people who had nowhere to go, people society had forgotten. Sam hadn't always had it easy, but he knew what it meant to feel invisible, and he made it his mission to make sure others never felt that way. But while he fought to give others a voice, his own was slowly being drowned out. In January 2025, Sam packed a bag, bought a bus ticket, and set off for New York. He told his family it was just a visit. He wanted a fresh start, to reconnect with an old acquaintance, maybe even find a new place to belong. It wasn't reckless. It wasn't unusual. It was hopeful. But hope, as fragile as it is, can sometimes lead you straight into the arms of those who mean you harm. A series of unread messages from Sam's sister. Hey, are you okay? Sam, please call me. The last message, I'm worried. For a while, everything seemed normal. A few check-ins. A couple of quick messages. Then, silence. His phone stopped ringing. His social media went quiet. At first, his family told themselves it was nothing. Maybe he was busy, maybe he was adjusting to a new routine. But as the days turned into weeks, an uneasy feeling settled in. A feeling they couldn't shake. A feeling that, somewhere out there, Sam was in trouble. And he was. At first, no one noticed. A missed call here. A delayed response there. Nothing out of the ordinary. Life gets busy. People forget to reply. It happens all the time. But then the messages stopped entirely. Sam Nordquist, always the one to check in, always the one to answer, even if just with a simple "I'm okay," had gone silent. And silence, as it turns out, can be deafening. His sister sent texts. No reply. His mother called. Straight to voicemail. Days passed. Then a week. Then two. At first, they tried to explain it away. Maybe his phone was broken. Maybe he was caught up in something new. Maybe, just maybe, he had finally found a place where he felt like he belonged. But the human gut is a powerful thing. And when something is wrong, you know. On February 3, 2025, Sam's family made it official. His name entered the missing persons database. A young man, 24 years old. 5'10". Brown hair. Brown eyes. Last known location, Canandaigua, New York. The police took the report, but leads were scarce. No recent bank activity. No social media updates. No sightings. Just nothing. A person does not simply vanish into thin air. And yet Sam had. A grainy figure walking into a motel room. The timestamp, January 12th. The door shuts. It never opens again. The world was searching for Sam. But Sam was already lost, trapped, alone, hidden in the one place no one thought to look. Inside a room no bigger than a prison cell, where the walls were closing in, where every second felt like an eternity, where no one, not his family, not the police, not the people scrolling past his name on a missing persons list, could hear him screaming. Because by the time they realized he was gone, he was already living a nightmare. From the outside, Patty's Lodge looked like any other roadside motel. A place for travelers passing through. A stop along the way. But for Sam Nordquist, it was a place he would never leave. Room 214 wasn't a motel room. It wasn't even a cage. It was something worse, something designed not just to trap him but to break him. The door had locks, ones that only turned from the outside. The windows? Blacked out. The bed? A thin mattress on a stained floor. A room that could have been anywhere, indistinguishable from 100 others. Except this one held a secret. This one held him. What happened inside those four walls defies understanding. For over a month, Sam endured cruelty beyond comprehension. His captors, people he once believed to be friends, became something else entirely. A presence that loomed over him, watching, waiting, deciding when to hurt him, when to feed him, when to remind him that he had no way out. And Sam? He was no longer a person to them. He was a game. A thing to torment. A thing to erase. The rules were simple. Sam didn't speak unless spoken to. He didn't eat unless allowed. He didn't move unless they said so. And when he failed, when the hunger became too much, when the pain forced a sound from his throat, they reminded him why he was here. Some nights they kept him awake for hours, asking questions that had no right answers. Other nights, they let the silence do the talking, watching him tremble in the dark, knowing that fear itself was sometimes the worst kind of torture. And when that wasn't enough, they escalated. Starvation, beatings, psychological torments so calculated, so methodical, that Sam began to lose himself. Days bled into nights, nights into days. Time stretched and collapsed in on itself until reality became something distant, something unattainable. And yet, through it all, Sam fought. He fought with the only weapon he had left, hope. Hope that someone would notice his absence. Hope that the world outside still remembered his name. Hope that, somehow, someway, this wasn't how his story ended. But his captors weren't just thieves of freedom. They were thieves of hope. And they had no intention of letting him leave that room alive. By the time the final night arrived, Sam Nordquist was already teetering on the edge. His body, starved, battered, broken, could barely hold itself upright. His mind, fractured from weeks of torment, drifted in and out of a place between consciousness and something darker. But he was still breathing. And for his captors, that was a problem. They had gone too far. Maybe they realized it that night. Maybe they knew it all along. But this wasn't just cruelty anymore. This wasn't a game. Sam had become something else to them now, evidence. A loose end that couldn't be allowed to speak, to walk away, to tell the world what had happened in room 214. And so the decision was made. Sam wasn't leaving that room alive. No one knows the exact moment it happened. Maybe it was a final blow. A fist. A weapon. A moment of unchecked rage that went just a little too far. Or maybe it was quieter. Maybe Sam was simply too weak, too broken to fight the darkness creeping in around him. But what we do know is that when it was over, when the room fell silent again, Sam Nordquist was gone. And his captors? They weren't panicked. They were calculating. There could be no body. No trace. No proof that Sam had ever been there at all. And so, in the dead of night, they moved quickly, efficiently, coldly. They wrapped him in sheets, layers of fabric absorbing the horror of what they had done. They carried him through the back exit, avoiding the security cameras, avoiding the headlights of passing cars. And then, they drove, mile after mile, town after town, away from the motel, away from the people sleeping soundly in their beds. Somewhere out there, Sam's family was still searching for him. Still dialing his number, still waiting for a call that would never come. But here, in the back seat of that car, he was nothing more than cargo. Just another thing to be disposed of. They stopped where no one would find him. A place where the earth was hard, where the night swallowed every sound. The body was dragged, unceremoniously tossed into the darkness. No grave. No goodbye. Just silence. And in that silence, as the car drove away, as the last traces of Sam Nordquist were abandoned to the elements, the world moved on, as if he had never been there at all. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning. A passerby, someone out for an early walk, someone who had no idea their life was about to intersect with something unthinkable, noticed something unusual in the distance. At first it was nothing more than a shape half hidden in the brush. A bundle of discarded fabric, torn and stiff from the cold. But then, the smell hit. The 911 call came in at exactly 7:42 a.m. A voice shaking. Incoherent. Desperate. There's a body. Law enforcement arrived within minutes, but the horror had already settled in. Even the most seasoned officers, the ones who had seen death before, who had investigated crime scenes that made headlines, paused. Because this wasn't just murder. This was something else entirely. Sam Nordquist's body told a story. A story of suffering. A story of restraint. A story of prolonged, methodical pain. His wrists, deeply scarred, ligature marks so precise they could only mean one thing. Restraint over and over again. His ribs, cracked in multiple places, some healing, some fresh. Proof that this hadn't been quick. That whatever had happened to him, had lasted. And then there were the burns. Small. Circular. Deliberate. Someone had taken their time. Whoever had left Sam here thought they had erased the evidence. But the human body has a way of keeping secrets. The fibers clinging to his clothing, they didn't match the field. They matched something else. Something artificial. Carpet. A motel room, perhaps. Under his nails, traces of skin. A final, desperate act of resistance. And then, the detail that changed everything. A single clue. Faint but undeniable. Sam had been somewhere before he ended up here. Somewhere with walls. Somewhere with locks. Somewhere that had held him captive. The pieces were coming together. But the truth? The truth was even worse than they imagined. Monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes, they walk among us. They shop at the same grocery stores. They laugh at the same jokes. They blend in. And when the news broke, when the world learned that 5 people had been arrested for the murder of Sam Nordquist, there was one question on everyone's mind. Who were they? And more importantly, why did they do it? Each of them had a past, a history, a pattern. And when investigators dug deeper, they found something chilling. These weren't strangers randomly brought together by chance. They were connected. And not just by the crime. By something far more disturbing. It started here. Buried deep within the internet, in dark corners most people never see, were posts, hundreds of them. Conversations about power. About control. About people they deemed less than. And there, among the usernames, investigators found something familiar. Names that matched the suspects. Words that matched their crime. It wasn't just talk. It was a blueprint. A plan, spoken in code but clear as day. And when the pieces came together, a terrifying truth emerged. This wasn't random. This wasn't impulsive. Sam Nordquist had been targeted. The 5 of them checked in under fake names. They paid in cash. They made sure the cameras couldn't see inside the room. But their biggest mistake? They didn't realize someone had been watching them all along. A witness. Someone who had heard the screams. Someone who had seen them come and go at odd hours, dragging something heavy in the dead of night. They didn't act then. But now, they were speaking. And their testimony? It cracked the case wide open. One by one they broke. One by one they gave up details that hadn't been released to the public. One by one, they turned on each other. But even as the truth unraveled, one question remained. Was this a hate crime? Or was it something even darker? The evidence was overwhelming. The intent was clear. And when prosecutors built their case, they didn't just go for murder. They went for something bigger. Because this wasn't just about Sam Nordquist. This was about every victim before him. And every victim that could have come next. Justice isn't automatic. It's fought for. Scraped from the jaws of doubt. And in this courtroom, behind the cold stare of the accused, behind the grief-stricken faces of Sam Nordquist's loved ones, a battle was about to begin. 5 suspects. 5 stories. And one undeniable truth, Sam Nordquist was dead. The charges were announced, second-degree murder. A charge that carried weight, but was it enough? The prosecution had a case built on horror. The torture. The captivity. The premeditated nature of it all. But there was one thing they wanted to prove above all else. This wasn't just murder. It was hate. And that carried consequences far beyond a single conviction. The prosecution wasted no time. They painted a picture of suffering, of calculated cruelty. They showed the jury the motel room, still stained with Sam's last moments. They played recordings. A neighbor's account of muffled cries. They displayed message after message, proving intent, proving malice, proving that this was never just a crime of passion. It was a crime of purpose. A crime of belief. The defense had a different story. They argued the suspects weren't monsters, just misguided. That there was no single mastermind. That blame could not be placed so easily. Some pointed fingers at each other. Some claimed they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And one of them tried to take a deal. One by one, the cracks in their stories began to show. Because the truth had already been written in bruises, in broken bones, in the haunting silence Sam left behind. And now, the jury held the final word. Would justice be served? Would this case set a precedent? Or would Sam Nordquist become just another name, another story, another echo in a system that so often turns away? The verdict was coming, and the world was watching. Fear lingers. It doesn't disappear when the trial ends. It doesn't fade when the headlines stop. For some, it only grows. Because the murder of Sam Nordquist wasn't just a crime. It was a message. And the question that lingers in the minds of so many is terrifying in its simplicity. Who's next? For the LGBTQ+ community, safety has never been a guarantee. The spaces meant to bring people together can just as easily become hunting grounds. A motel room. A date gone wrong. A friend who was never really a friend. And in the aftermath of Sam's murder, one truth became painfully clear. This wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a pattern. A cycle of violence. One that too many have fallen into, unheard, unseen, until it was too late. How many warnings were ignored? How many times had Sam's life been in danger before that final night? The system isn't just failing. It's looking the other way. So what happens next? What do we do with the fear left behind? Do we let it consume us? Or do we turn it into something else? A demand. A movement. A refusal to let another name become just another statistic. Because Sam Nordquist's story shouldn't end in silence. It should end in change. Sam Nordquist wasn't just a case file. Not just a victim. Not just a headline that people would forget when the next tragedy came along. Sam had a life. A voice. A future. Until someone decided he didn't deserve one. He was more than his final moments. But those final moments tell a story that cannot be ignored. Sam's story is over. But how many more are still unfolding? How many more names are out there waiting to be spoken? How many more people are trapped right now in places no one is looking? Sam Nordquist will never get to tell his story. But that doesn't mean we stop listening. It doesn't mean we stop searching. It doesn't mean we stop fighting so that no one else has to be next. Who is still out there waiting to be found?